Our guest today is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Chicago Community Trust. He was selected as just the 5th executive in the Chicago Community Trust's 90-year history 5 years ago. Our guest today led the design and implementation of the Trust's $50 million 5-year commitment to supporting literacy, teacher and principal quality, and new school creation in Chicago. He earned his master's degree in anthropology and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Arizona. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, Terry Mazany. Terry?
Thank you very much, Jay, and everybody for being here. I was not nervous about this speech until I got into this room and saw who was here, because this roomful is the essence of my remarks today. It's about the quality of leaders that Chicago has and continues to nurture. And all of a sudden, I'm in front of everybody who I think is a lot smarter, a lot wiser than I am, and here I am trying to make some remarks about that. I especially want to acknowledge, I've got several board members here from the board of the Chicago Community Trust that by historical fluke is called the Executive Committee. There is no executive committee separate from our board. And so we do have Frank Clark. Pleasure to have him here. And Jack Greenberg and Jack Catlin. And Adela Cepeda and Jesse Ruiz. And I sincerely hope I made it around the room enough to capture everybody from our board who's here. I also want a special acknowledgement to Nancy Searle, who's been my partner in philanthropy for the last 8 years, representing the Searle family. And I realized that I did not need to write down my thoughts because I could have just gone around the room and touched on stories about everybody and the magnificent work here, from Christy Hefner and the Black Ensemble Theater to Andy Mooney and the work with the New Communities program and the extraordinary things that are happening there. And we've got Howard Lerner in the back with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, who's played an instrumental role in bringing cohesion to the high-speed rail bid. And Lou Manilow has got 1,001 ideas that I try to capture 1 or 2 every so often. And of course, my colleague in the field here with Ellen Alberding. And like I said, I could fill up the entire 30 minutes just bouncing table to table to table for that. But that's not why you're here. Everybody, I appreciate you cut short your summer vacations so that you could come here and hear me talk. So I need to deliver big time. I recognize that. And I also appreciate that NBC this summer set the bar really high with their self-proclaimed summer smash hit, The Philanthropists. And so you're all here just on the edge of your seats to be regaled by the stories of the passion and drama, the international intrigue and romance ripped from the headlines of true philanthropy. Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't think of a better, more powerful television series than about the work that I'm able to do on a daily basis. Unfortunately. I'm reminded of the time when my first career as an anthropologist and a group of high school students who were part of an NSF camp that I was director of And so I took them, of course, before we went out into the field that summer to see this movie that had just come out with Harrison Ford about this guy named Indiana Jones. And so I showed the students, this is what your summer will be like. Instead, I think we spent the summer toiling in the hot sun and dust, and they never did find the golden chalice or any of that. It's terrific that we've got the City Club, and thank you, Jay, for slotting us into the full calendar for this fall. I like the fact that you've got this theme of philanthropy that is now running through the series here for that. And so understanding that I need to make a comment about everybody in the room to be inclusive, for the next 3 hours I will talk at length about philanthropy in our community and wrap up, I think, especially with focusing on some important messages around giving and engagement that I think is expected of us more than others. First, I want to provide a bit of an overview of the Chicago Community Trust. I know a lot of you think of us as a grant maker, but what's less well understood is our role as convener and collaborator, innovator and incubator. Then I want to talk somewhat about the changing role of philanthropy in the context of our changing world. And then finally talk about what I see as the most pressing needs of metropolitan Chicago and my thoughts about our path forward here. If you're involved at all with the nonprofit community in Chicago, and I think I can name the nonprofit boards on which each and every one of you sit, then you do know about the Chicago Community Trust. You know that we're a partner with donors to support their giving while living and for those who seek to leave a lasting legacy to the community. Over the last 94 years, the collective might of these donors has provided over $1 billion in grants, and each year we make grants to over 2,000 organizations in our region. In practical terms, this means that we gain a lot of hands-on experience and expertise with the full range of community needs, our focus areas, arts and culture, basic human needs, community development, education, and health. We assess organizations which are best in class, and we spot fledgling organizations with talented new leaders which bring fresh new ideas to the chronic problems of our neighborhoods. We understand connections between sectors and utilize grants from endowed funds to implement sophisticated strategies that produce measurable results with lasting impact. Now, a year ago, Jay had the wisdom to invite me at that period of time, my tone would have been very different. This was a time still flush with the bloom of optimism and the exuberance of a robust economy, not then recognizing that we were already on the downward slide, hurtling towards a catastrophic economic meltdown. And when I review the materials that we submitted to our board at this time last year, I can really confront the magnitude of change wrought over the course of a single year. Then, we were a $1.8 billion foundation set to cross the $2 billion mark this year, 2009. Our grant making topped $100 million for the second year in a row, and we were fully expecting these trends to continue. Fortunately, we're built for the long haul. We played a leadership role during the Great Depression, and we've weathered the current brutal economic headwinds. A signature moment this past year, which highlights the character of our city and the nature of our relationship with donors, was our Unity Challenge. Last November, our board called for a forceful response to the deteriorating conditions of our community to provide immediate relief to those bearing the brunt of this crisis. In response, we increased our basic human needs grant making by 40% and launched the Unity Challenge, a 2-for-1 match for all donor contributions for housing, food, legal assistance, foreclosure prevention, and job training. We also began publishing our monthly Chicago Metro Vital Signs to track the human impact of the recession in our region. And around here you've got the latest reports for those indicators. If you haven't seen them, they're easily accessible on our website, cct.org. This was to give us our own immediate local perspective, to aggregate a series of indicators together so we can understand how this economic recession affects us locally. Altogether, donors contributed $1.3 million, which created a Unity Fund total of $4 million. And I especially want to acknowledge Julia Stash and Jonathan Fanton for putting this challenge over the top with a $500,000 contribution from the MacArthur Foundation. As important as that gift was, it also underscores how philanthropy works in Chicago. It's about foundations working together to combine resources for maximum impact. So at the same time we respond to the most pressing needs, Chicago's foundations are also mindful of long-term opportunities to bring about improved quality of life for our fellow residents and contribute to our region's prosperity. It's the leadership of the Joyce Foundation for the 2010 census, working with 9 other foundations to raise more than $1 million for the Count Me In campaign to ensure that everyone in our state is counted so that we don't lose federal resources and congressional seats. These partnerships are about the leadership provided by the Boeing Company to renew Chicago's historical identity with jazz through the Jazz Partnership. And for being a relatively newcomer on the corporate scene in Chicago, Boeing is clearly emulating Chicago's standard for corporate citizenship. For that, we have to recognize not only Boeing's executive leadership, but also Ann Roosevelt, who plays a critical role leading their Global Citizen program. Another example of the power of this partnership is the Polk Brothers Foundation under the leadership of Sandy Guthman. Its pioneering work with community schools leveraged an innovative model of schooling started 10 years ago to create a network of 150 community schools, now a national model supported by former CPS CEO Arnie Duncan, our new Secretary of Education. There's a lot of talk about a new normal, that everything's changed, it's all different. Unfortunately, I could tell I've reached that age, you can tell by the lack of hair and the gray beard, that maybe all of the talk about the new normal isn't all that new anymore. I think it's what people said after the savings and loan debacle in the 80s, or after the economic boom in the 90s, when it was asserted that the rules of the old economy were to be replaced by new rules, only to see the old rules reassert themselves when the dot-com bubble burst. But yet, a few short years later, we were pumping up a new bubble, this one built on housing and exotic financial instruments. That being said, I would be dismayed if we revert to the same old, same old. After all, in the so-called good old days of our recent economic prosperity, we had 45 million people in the country without health insurance. Here in the 6-county region of northeastern Illinois, we had 1 million people living in poverty. That's 1 out of every 8 residents, many of them children. We had and still have about half of our high school students graduating, and we've stalled out in our efforts to lower homicide rates. I do believe that there is an opportunity for a new normal in philanthropy. The guiding principle defining this new normal is a heightened and shared sense of civic responsibility and willingness to work together to invent and invest in solutions to truly massive problems. Why do I see such opportunities? First of all, philanthropy is now at decision-making tables in ways that go beyond traditional relationships. We have a president and first lady who have life experiences in philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. They deeply understand our world and openly invite us to engagement. This permeates President Obama's administration and the character of his cabinet with individuals like Arne Duncan and Sean Donovan. Just reflect on what Arne Duncan did locally here, opening up the school district to partnerships with foundations around the district's major priorities. Chicago, in fact, provides the national model for partnership between philanthropy and government, with roots going all the way back to the Burnham Plan and more recently reflected in the gem of Millennium Park. Today we have the Recovery Partnership established by Mayor Daley that involves over 50 foundations in the alignment of funds, capacity building for nonprofits, and evaluation of over $1 billion in stimulus funding. The central and defining aspect of this recovery partnership is that comprehensive evaluation of the use and impact of that infusion of one-time dollars. What difference will these funds make? What legacy will they leave for us? This opportunity for engagement highlights the significant role that foundations play as the true seed capital of innovation. Although the Obama administration is seeking to foster a climate of innovation in federal government, at the end of the day, we know that innovation will not likely result from government programs. The hallmark of true innovation is repeated failure, and yet the political consequence of repeated failure in government is to be ousted from office. This capacity for innovation comes from the inherent independence of foundations and nonprofit organizations. Foundations are able to invest early and in high-risk opportunities that may fail, but from which we can learn and progress. Even the President's Office of Social Innovation will find itself besieged with political considerations as it seeks to distribute a relatively modest $35 million fund. And to put that into perspective, the amount available nationally is equal to the amount of competitive grant funds that the Chicago Community Trust awards each year, and we have to only contend with 6 counties that serve 8 million people. In the new normal of philanthropy, foundations find themselves needing to be more agile and move more quickly in their deliberations and to be more muscular in asserting what they know to be true. The double-edged sword of this moment is that foundations are increasingly accountable for the veracity of our claims of knowledge. We have to prove that the projects we have funded actually produce results. Does investing in teacher knowledge of reading contribute to increased student achievement? Do mixed income communities result in better outcomes for jobs and education for the residents in those communities? And do these communities break down the historical patterns of segregation in our cities? Even as we find ourselves more accountable, foundations also provide resources to hold government accountable. We see this locally with the establishment of Change Illinois and the resurgence of the Better Government Association under the leadership of Andy Shaw. While government is typically not on the bleeding edge of innovation, it does have vastly more resources to implement change at scale. But the ultimate success for private sector investments requires honest and efficient government that maximizes use of tax dollars for sound policies and economic development strategies. It's in all of our interests to assure that that happens. The new normal of philanthropy is characterized by greater collaboration because many of today's problems are bigger than an individual organization can tackle. There's the need for cross-sector collaboration. To revitalize our communities, we need to integrate the resources of housing and transportation, energy and environment, and jobs and education. That will happen at the local level and not in Washington, but the rules and regulations from Washington must allow for the commingling of program funds. Finally, philanthropy provides a longer time horizon in which to work on the most vexing problems of our society. We're not tied to quarterly market cycles or four-year election cycles. For example, 20 years ago, the Chicago Community Trust founded Voices for Illinois Children to fill the void of advocacy for the smallest and youngest among us. Voices, together with Irving Harris's Ounce of Prevention and Action for Children, achieved remarkable success to ensure care and coverage for infants and young children through the passage of Kid Care, All Kids Health Insurance, and Preschool for All. This work spans several governors and legislative leaders. We're reminded during the centennial year of the Burnham and Bennett Plan of Chicago that the future, this new normal, is not predestined and cannot be taken for granted. Our future is determined by the choices we make today. This moment is no different than the moment 100 years ago when Daniel Burnham rallied the commercial club around a compelling vision for what this city could be, and then the commercial club rallied the citizenry around the 86 bond issues that were required to make this vision a reality. We have used the centennial milestone of urban planning to take stock of our progress, examine where we have fallen short, remind ourselves of the benefits we enjoy today because of the foresight of those who came before us, and to learn from those lessons to chart a course that confers to our children and their children similar advantages and benefits. Part of the plan talked about the human element, and I know for Susan Aaron back here, who was one of the early leaders for the Burnham Centennial, she knows that I will bring this quote into anything that I say, but it's when Daniel Burnham on page 8 of the Burnham and Bennett Plan of Chicago talks about the spirit of Chicago. Our greatest asset, he says, it is not merely civic pride, it is rather the constant, steady determination to bring about the very best conditions of city life for all the people, with full knowledge that what we as a people decide to do in the public interest, we can and surely will bring to pass. It was within this context that the Chicago Community Trust was founded in 1915. The central idea of this, described by Frank Denham Lewis, the first executive director, was free endowments under capable management adaptable to changing conditions. We were to make available to people of wealth and influence credible information about the sector. But we were to do more than that, as Mr. Loomis noted. Most importantly, the role of the Community Foundation lies in quietly nourishing the spirit of community philanthropy. I commented on several of our board members here. That's our true strength. Community foundations are the public face of philanthropy. Our executive committee members arrive at their appointments by a process that includes appointing authorities from among our government and university officials, as well as our trustee banks. I'm very pleased with a large contingent of Northern Trust representatives here for that. We've got a terrific relationship there, although I have to also acknowledge that the founding trustee bank for us was Harris Savings and Trust Bank. Chicago, more than many cities, has this remarkable heritage of philanthropy and volunteerism that provides strength and resiliency during the most difficult times, and true to form cushions the brutal impact of the times in which we live. But philanthropy has its limits. Nationally, there is talk about green shoots of economic recovery, but the same cannot be said about our local situation. Our economy has yet to absorb the steep state budget cuts, such as the $1 billion cut from human services, layoffs of state personnel, and the massive cuts in the nonprofit sector, areas such as women's shelters and mental health clinics. These reductions are so severe that we cannot even think of filling the hole with funds from philanthropy. Statewide, foundations make annual grants totaling about $2 billion, not even close to covering our state's budget shortfall, even if there was wisdom in such a thing. The indicators that we have do not yet show signs of a recovery in our area. And with this, I want to acknowledge Laura Thal from the United Way. As part of our response has been to work closely with the state to try to moderate the impact of this. Fortunately, we were working earlier to build a collaborative back office of our largest nonprofit organizations, create an advocacy program statewide for this, and now looking to understand and partner with the state so that as the cuts roll out, we can continue to secure essential services for those in our society most in need, most pressed to the margins. But as you see, unemployment continues to steadily increase, up to 10.3%, and massive layoffs are well above 15,000 each month since last November. Food pantries continue to serve hundreds of thousands of people, and food stamp utilization has shot up by 40%, with more than 466,000 households relying on food stamps. The Greater Chicago Food Depository reports an increase in demand of 30% over the past year and distributed a record 58 million pounds of food, well above their historical high of 46 million pounds. The good news is that because of philanthropic investments during the good times, we have the food distribution capacity in place to meet this increased need. Thanks to donors like Ann Lurie and nonprofit leaders like Michael Mulqueen, who had the vision and the drive to build a state-of-the-art food distribution center that can rival the efficiencies of any commercial supply chain. Our neighborhoods will continue to bear the brunt of the recession, hammered by unemployment and foreclosure. While the rate of foreclosures looks like it dips right now, that's only an artifact of two new pieces of legislation, the Homeowners Protection Act and the Home Affordable Modification Program, which have provided breathing room, but it's temporary without adequate supports for counseling agencies, legal aid providers, advocacy, and organizers to keep servicers of these loans accountable and spread the word and assist families to navigate this process. Against this backdrop, the Trust will do its first comprehensive reset of grant strategies since the year 2000, when the Executive Committee determined education was the most important priority underpinning Chicago's emergence as a global city competing on a world stage. So what do I envision these priorities for the next decade? First, it's clear that our future opportunities lie in our success as a region. Richard Longworth's book, Caught in the Middle, captured perfectly the challenges and opportunities we have. The 12 states form a $5 trillion economy, one of the world's largest economic powers, if we work together. That's where Howard Lerner's work with the High-Speed Rail Collaborative is so critical to that. We've got what Brookings has produced in the Blueprint for American Prosperity, Metropolitan Planning Council, and CEOs for Cities working together to support the efforts of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and the GO-TO 2040 plan, our next large regional plan. It's a focus on education. That's the talent dividend, investment in innovation, investment in infrastructure, and environmentally sustainable economic development, and investment in the quality of places we live in. I envision that education will remain near the top of our list, but unfortunately, our efforts to increase education attainment are undercut by growing poverty. The number of people now living in poverty is estimated to be 1.4 million, a 40% increase over recent years. And as we begin this period of economic recovery, we need to be thoughtful to ensure that economic growth is shared more equally. Who benefits from the prospect of this prosperity need not be a matter left to chance. there's absolutely no reason why economic recovery cannot include policies that improve housing opportunities for communities such as Woodlawn and Little Village, generate opportunities for businesses owned by minorities, women, and persons with disabilities, extend employment opportunities to those historically denied access to union jobs, and to provide increased opportunities for youth employment, all there. A major threat to our well-being as a community is the level of gun violence and homicide. Development and security are mutually dependent. We have Gary Slutkin here with Cease Fire that has received great support now from the state, but he will benchmark us to comparable European cities, and at that level we should only experience 140 homicides a year, not 500 that we currently have. Healthcare will remain on the list, key priorities being access, affordability, and quality. These are the same principles that underpin the Urban Health Initiative and other efforts to extend quality of care to our most underserved neighborhoods. And yet, we can spend on health care, or we can spend on prevention and creating and strategies that increase healthy lifestyles and reduce environmental hazards. We've got Loyola's Lead Safe Housing initiatives, which received $5 million out of the state bond. That was a terrific addition. We've got the Consortium to Lower Obesity in Chicago's Children, headed up by Children's Memorial Hospital, with over 1,900 partners and 800 organizations. And then earlier this year, we enjoyed the open streets, where we closed down the boulevards to automobile traffic and opened it up for bicycling and pedestrians. We also have opportunities to take from the stimulus and projects such as residential energy retrofits, turn those into sustainable businesses. Right now we're working on about 1,000 homes a year. We've got a pool of 400,000 homes in the Climate Action Plan that need retrofits. How do we ramp up to businesses that can generate 40,000 home retrofits a year for the next 10 years? Great business opportunities there. And then there's the work of the digital divide, and that's where got to really tip my hat to Charles Benton and the long-standing work he's done there, an opportunity to bring that resource to Chicago's most underserved neighborhoods. Be on the lookout for a grant award on the BTOP program as part of the stimulus. If we're able to secure even a modest amount of that funding, that will go a long way into accelerating the implementation of our digital excellence plan here. I also don't want to overlook arts. They're essential for a creative economy, and that vital role begins early in education. We've partnered with other foundations to reestablish arts in the public schools and connect over 250 arts partners with those schools. And this fall, we welcome the opening of the Chicago High School for the Arts. But it's not enough to list these priorities for our community. We will need the resources to tackle them. That takes me back to the Trust's founding imperative to nourish the spirit of community philanthropy. Nationally, Americans donated more than $300 billion for the second year in a row. That amounts to about 2.2% of our GDP. Of that $300 billion, foundations and corporations give only $50 billion. The other 85% of giving is from individuals. If our national savings rate can go from a negative number to over 6% in a single year, which it has, I wonder what would happen if we had a similar response to our charitable giving and grew our contributions from 2.2% of GDP to even 3% of GDP. That would be an infusion of over $100 billion into the sector. And yet we're seeing just the opposite. Reports are that volunteerism has dropped this past year, as has corporate giving. 52% of corporations now report that they have cut charitable giving. Foundations assets are down by at least 25%, and over half foundations nationally have indicated that they will reduce giving by 10%. In the face of a devastating economic climate, we are at a particularly challenging moment in history. With diminished resources in all sectors, we're still compelled to respond to rising unemployment and rising poverty. The history of Chicago in particular demonstrates repeatedly that the resource of our resiliency during economic recessions is the role of private donations and volunteer leadership, that spirit of Chicago. We are in an even stronger position today than we were in the Great Depression, thanks to the foresight of those who left endowed legacies for future generations. Maybe the new normal in philanthropy is about a renewed spirit of generosity and civic engagement. Instead of a return to consumption to revive our economy, let us champion a return to contributions. We become the front lines of our community's welfare, hopes, and dreams. At the end of the day, in a world that sometimes seems wildly out of control, individually and collectively, we are all forces for good. I want to thank you today taking your time to join with me and others to renew our shared spirit of Chicago.
Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much. Questions? Anybody have any questions written down for Terry while we have him? I have a question I could start with. Tweed, did you pass out the forms? Okay. Okay, I'll start with one. Do you have any thoughts to share or sources about demographics in terms of giving? That is, age groups, geographic locations. Where might we learn more about that nationwide?
The fundamental resource for patterns of giving is Giving USA. It's always looking through the rearview mirror. It's a year out of date. But that resource, and then Bank of America in particular, issues a regular survey of high net worth individuals that provides interesting patterns. And then there's the Center for Effective Philanthropy down at Indiana University.
Thanks. This is from Monsignor Velo. Please comment on something that impacts so many here today, the public sector seeking funds from private sources. For example, Chicago Public Schools Renaissance Program.
Not quite sure I understand the import of that question.
You want to clarify? Sure. Okay.
Okay. Okay, yeah, the question was about when it seems that public institutions, the school district and others, are also seeking philanthropic funds. In Chicago, there's been an ongoing history of partnership and collaboration between the public and private sector. What I see happening now to a greater degree is the alignment of that work. So from a foundation point of view, we view it as leveraging public dollars. They may view it as acquiring additional dollars, but we turn it upside down and to say that if a $100,000 grant to the Chicago Public Schools can cause them to spend $10 million on something else that we think will be more effective in educating students, then that's a very good high leverage investment. So that's the way we see it. I had to cut out of here. I had remarks as well on the Olympic efforts and the leveraging here, there. We see it as an economic driver and an opportunity to bolster regional competitiveness, but recognizing that on the ground it's going to feel like a diversion of philanthropic dollars from organizations that have immediate needs.
That was a question that was coming up. Do you support the city's Olympic bid? Couldn't all that money be better spent helping Chicago neighborhoods? You kind of answered that, but perhaps add.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I recognize that every philanthropic dollar has its origins in some commercial enterprise. I think about the gift that John G. Searle left with the Chicago Community Trust and with the family generally. And we need robust economic development. And I draw the connection between the opportunity to pull us out of the recession, create a global presence so that international businesses don't just stop at the coast, but in fact they've got a reason to focus on metropolitan Chicago and set up business relationships here that will be present during the 5 or 6 years running up to the Olympics. The Olympics is just one moment in time, but it's all of the engagement. It's the creation of the international media centers that will be built here to support their efforts for the Olympics and things like that, that will leave a lasting legacy of economic benefit and development that in turn will generate more philanthropic resources.
I have a footnote on that. Money given to the Olympic bid isn't necessarily money that would have been given to other efforts. This is from Jeff Houston. Did I say that correctly? U.S. Equities Realty. Please describe the Trust's Donor Advisor Funds program and how you are currently advising those donors.
It goes back to my opening comments about people viewing us as a grant-making institution with endowed resources. There's another part of the trust, which is active partnerships, living donors, establishing donor-advised funds, which are a low-cost, efficient vehicle to help an individual donor manage their philanthropy, keep all of their record keeping in one place, be able to direct dollars to causes that are important, and to be able to tap the expertise of the trust staff if there are areas that you want to build grant strategies or identify organizations in an area that you may not be aware of. For instance, if you're interested in preventing domestic violence, what are the organizations doing powerful work there? If you're interested in improving literacy, who's doing the work there? How are philanthropic dollars best leveraged to bring about change in student reading?
Got a few more here. This is from Salim from the Healthcare Consortium of Illinois. What help do you provide to community-based research, and what is its role in community development?
This is great. We're picking up all of the gaps in my speech as I was. It's an important role that we play is to commission research on pressing issues. As we do our grant reset, all of our program officers in areas are going to be working with the agencies like Woodstock Institute that does the work on our foreclosure numbers to identify the latest research. It'll not only be available to us, but it'll be publicly available for others to use to factor into their grant-making strategies, identifying top needs. It's out of that where we had identified 15 years ago the impact of homicides on life expectancy, and as a major public health issue, we were fortunate to have interacted and met Gary Slutkin at that period of time, who had a public health strategy to intervene on this problem.
Okay, a few more. From Frank Clark, Commonwealth Edison. Please talk about the work and funding from the Chicago Community Trust to aid in improving education in Chicago.
Okay. Absolutely, Frank. That's a whole nother 30-minute speech there. As you know, for the last decade, the Trust has been fully involved in improving public education. We had a great partnership with Arne Duncan. We were awarding about $10 million a year, focused very tightly on improving teacher quality, principal leadership, creating new schools that had opportunities for break-the-mold strategies for student learning for this. And it was those investments of understanding that in the classroom, quality of teacher makes the biggest difference. It's supported by research study after research study. Principal leadership is essential as much to require and enable teachers within a school to work together, because it's their collective work that links students across classrooms and across the span of grade levels for that. And it has to be supported by a district-wide context where you've got clear high standards of performance, accountability, the curriculum roadmaps to get students from preschool out to graduation, and then the other supports for students as they enter the difficult middle school years and high school years.
This from Graham Grady on the subject of education, not to be negative, but what do you make of the still left behind report of the Civic Committee, which demonstrates public school failure despite corporate and other giving?
We've been looking closely at that report. It presents an accurate but incomplete view. It casts with a broad brush one set of numbers. It calls into question the state standards and reporting, which are woefully inadequate. If you achieve a meets expectations on a state test, you will not be able to progress to college. You've got to be at the exceeds level. The Consortium on Chicago School Research has demonstrated that in their studies. But at the end of the day, I think it's incomplete. It doesn't show the remarkable progress that many schools have made. Those are obscured by the averaging down to a single number for the entire district for that. And it doesn't tell the story of what it takes to get there. There's a single solution presented, and that is charter schools. And yet when you compare the charter schools to the same benchmark that was being critiqued for the Chicago public schools as a whole, they fare no better. So how could you put forward a solution that in fact isn't better than what you're critiquing? So that to me is a very troublesome aspect of that. So it's deflected attention from where we know investments need to be made. We've been in conversations with the Consortium on Chicago School Research for them simply to publish a set of all of the indicators available for schools. It's not just test scores, it's graduation rates, which have gone up. It's progress on track rates for ninth grades, which have gone up. It's attendance. It's a number of things that show that, in fact, over the last decade, the schools have made tremendous progress, simply not enough because we keep raising the bar on the requirements in this global era that we live in. I should also comment, though, that another question that you should have asked was about our support for the identity-based funds for the African American legacy and Nuestro Futuro to extend opportunities for philanthropic engagement more broadly in the community.
Okay, this is our last question from Chris Long. Please comment about immigration and immigrants.
We can indeed make this an afternoon symposium without a problem. Everybody here is probably aware that what happens in Washington on immigration reform is totally different than what happens locally. For better or worse, the public schools have to accept children who are undocumented or children of undocumented residents. They have to. Health clinics have to provide care for these children for that. The services, the human services have to be provided. You cannot turn away individuals. So it's a real and pressing problem. I lived in California in the 90s when we had that problem full on in that state. And we were confronted with how do we provide these services without the resources there. So there's a human problem that we need Washington to be able to fix. What we've done in our capacity is to create an immigrant incorporation initiative. that's worked primarily in the suburban communities that do not have the human service infrastructure the way the city of Chicago does. And we've got great examples of mayors stepping up, providing the leadership in their communities to extend an outreach for new services, to bring individuals into the political process in their communities, and to create a awareness and response to the needs of immigrants and their children. So it's particularly a large percent of our immigrant population are young children under the age of 12.
Thank you very much, Terry. And it is incumbent upon me to present you with a few traditional items. This is a certificate of thanks from the City Club of Chicago. The ubiquitous mug, and the centennial history of the City Club of Chicago. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. See you next time. We're adjourned.